If you had to pick 7 ancient wonders of the world, which ones would they be? We've compiled a list of our top 7, from the soaring heights of the Great Pyramid, to the statues of Easter Island, exotic Mayan temples, a Roman amphitheatre, and the Great Wall of China. Over the next 2 hours, we'll explore some of the most awesome ancient wonders, each rich in stories of mystery and intrigue. We'll take part in the summer solstice celebrations at Stonehenge, walk the Great Wall of China, and join archaeologists in Mexico as they hunt for treasure in the Maya temples. By searching for clues hidden within these historic monuments, we can begin to unlock their secrets and reveal the marvels of these ancient wonders of the world. The 3 pyramids of Giza have stood on a high plateau by the Nile for more than 4,500 years. These wonders were built by the ancient Egyptian King Khufu, his son, and his grandson. Khufu's Great Pyramid is the largest and most impressive of them all.
The pyramid has magic and mystery. And I always say, if you come by to visit the Giza plateau and just walk and you can see the pyramid for the first time, your heart will be going up and down because it's something that cannot be explained. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is immortal.
Amazingly, these ancient wonders are only a few minutes from downtown Cairo. The pyramids at Giza are the planet's original tourist attraction.
Awesome to think that you are standing on ancient history and seeing it in person. This is so much better than any kind of picture or television or anything. It's just unbelievable.
Today, millions of visitors from around the world come to marvel at the pyramids.
You know, I have always been thinking about pyramids. Since I was a little kid, for me, it's kind of a dream come true.
I tried to read up on it ahead of time, and there's just no way to prepare yourself for this. It's just absolutely amazing.
Once seen, these ancient giants are never forgotten.
All of this really captures the heart of everyone who come to visit Egypt. And therefore, when you go to paradise, God will say, the only mistake that you did in your life, that you did not visit the pyramid.
The Great Pyramid is the largest monument ever built. The base is bigger than any temple or cathedral, and until the Eiffel Tower was finished in 1887, it was the tallest structure for over 4,000 years.
When we did an estimation a few months ago, we found out that the stones of the Great Pyramid are 1,300,000 blocks. These pyramids were massive, built of massive stones.
The precision of their construction is astonishing. The four sides were aligned almost exactly with true north, south, east, and west, and the outer casing blocks were so skillfully laid that even a knife blade won't fit between them. Robert Bauval, born in Egypt, has been fascinated by the pyramids all his life. He's a construction engineer and full of admiration for the amazing skills of the ancient pyramid builders.
There is no question that the Giza necropolis is the largest engineering project in the world in history. A normal skyrise will contain something in the order of 200,000 tons of material. This is 6 million tons. You're talking about 10 to 15 times greater. So they're the giant skyscrapers of history.
4,500 years on, we still have no real idea how the Egyptians managed to construct these gigantic monuments, the largest stone structures ever built.
The thing that makes them special is the fact that we know very little about them. We don't know exactly who built them. We don't know exactly how old they are. We don't know why they built them. So it's a huge question mark that looms in the desert. Some of the blocks that were used weigh up to 60 tons. These blocks are made of granite. Granite is imported from 600 miles to the south of Egypt, down the Nile. Can you imagine 60 tons? 60 tons is 60 family cars, compacted into one block. So this is the kind of problems that we see, and they seem to sort of tease us with this mystery. It is a challenge to future generations to say, figure out how we did it.
All three pyramids at Giza were originally cased with polished white limestone. Over the centuries, most of this limestone has been pillaged, but a few blocks remain around the base of the Great Pyramid and on the summit of King Khufu's pyramid.
You can see the pyramids today from Mayans around, but with this reflective surface, they would have been sparkling. So you can imagine when they were new, they would have been absolutely staggering.
If their size remains a marvel, their purpose remains one of the greatest mysteries. The traditionally accepted view is that they were built as tombs for the mummified bodies of the pharaohs.
The pyramid was a tomb, but it was also a national project of the whole nation. Every household in the north of Egypt and the south participated in building the pyramid by sending workforce, grain, food to help the king, because the pyramid will help the rebirth of the king. It will make the king as a god. When they put the capstone in the top of the pyramid, it meant that the pyramid was finished, and everyone danced and sing.
But Robert Bauval has a controversial alternative theory which he began to formulate 20 years ago. His first seeds of doubt were sown deep inside the pyramid. The experience of climbing through this ancient structure is unforgettable and completely impossible if you suffer even the tiniest degree of claustrophobia. Close to the heart of the pyramid, the tiny passageway opens up into the grand gallery. Over the centuries, the pale limestone has been blackened by the soot from countless candle flames. It was here in the king's chamber that Bauval first questioned the orthodox view that this was a tomb for King Khufu's mummified body.
Egyptologists say that this is a coffin for a dead body. But it may not be a coffin. It may be a place where great resurrection rituals would take place. In fact, it may be something that served for the living, not for the dead.
No human remains have ever been found inside any Egyptian pyramid. Bauval believes this suggests that the monuments were built not as tombs, but as a grand setting for symbolic resurrections. He was also intrigued by the curious layout of the pyramids. The two largest are set along a southwest diagonal line, but the and smaller pyramid of Mycerinos was slightly offset to the east. Why was the third pyramid both smaller and built out of line?
It was one of those things that being an engineer and being a surveying engineer was totally puzzling. I had a hunch that it had something to do with the stars, the star religion.
Bauval followed up his hunch by taking a closer look at a completely different pyramid at the ancient site of Saqqara, 25 miles from Giza. This small pyramid was built for King Unas, 200 years after the Great Pyramid. It may look decrepit, but it holds some of the most revealing testimonies of the ancient Egyptian culture. Apart from some insignificant graffiti, the pyramids of Giza are completely devoid of writing. But deep inside this pyramid are the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writing in the world. Two tiny rooms are crammed with magical spells, prayers, and hymns about the rebirth of the king and his reunion with the gods in the afterlife.
They're intensely astronomical. They speak of the stars, they speak of the sun. It seems it's all about the sky, which is not surprising because this was the afterlife destiny of the king.
Many of the hieroglyphs tell of the king making his afterlife journey to the stars, in particular to the constellation of Orion. The Egyptians believed Orion was the representation of Osiris, the god of regeneration and symbol of eternal life. So Bauval wondered if there could be a link between Orion and the unusual layout of the pyramids at Giza. After the break, we reveal Bauval's ingenious solution to the mystery. Author Robert Bauval's brainwave about the unusual alignment of the pyramids of Giza came during a chance conversation in the desert. His friend was contemplating the three stars of Orion's belt.
And he pointed specifically about these stars, and he referred to them as the three stars in a row, and then just as an afterthought said, but the third one is offset to the left. And the penny dropped. Suddenly there was a correlation in my mind as to why this design, this layout of the three pyramids had been set this way.
With mounting excitement, Bauval began to formulate his theory that the ancient Egyptians based the layout of the pyramids on a plan of the stars. When he got back to Giza, Bauval found further proof that the pyramids were designed to assist the king's afterlife journey to the stars. In the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, a so-called ventilation shaft is aligned directly with the peak position of Orion's belt as it would have been seen in the ancient Egyptian night sky. And similar shafts originating from the center of the pyramid point directly towards other constellations that also had important significance in the ancient Egyptian star religion. By now, Bauval had enough evidence to construct his controversial theory.
The whole machinery of the religion was how to ensure that their pharaohs, after death, would manage to undertake this celestial journey and return to the stars. And these monuments are the agency to produce that result. They are launching pads, if you like, for the pharaohs to reach the stars.
Bauval's now famous Orion correlation theory took the world by storm and reopened the debate about the mystery of the pyramids. Most Egyptologists stand firm in their belief that the pyramids were built as tombs, and they've completely dismissed Bauval's star theory.
It's beautifully written, it's beautifully made, it's computer analysis, but it's strong. Because those people, they come and smell the dirt. Like I always say that those people, they go and they write these books in an air-conditioned room in London or in America. But we excavate, and our perfume is the dirt.
Whichever theory is correct, there remains an unsolved mystery. What happened to the mummified corpses of King Khufu, his son, and his grandson? If Bauval's theory holds true and the pyramids weren't used as tombs, the mummies might have been buried somewhere nearby.
Perhaps one day they will pop out. I mean, one has to bear in mind that you're looking at the tip of the iceberg here, because there are still a lot of unexcavated sites. I mean, they keep on finding things all the time. They say that 70% of what was here is still underground. So they may still pop out.
There are many questions still to be answered about the pyramids at Giza, and it's likely that these ancient wonders will always be shrouded in mystery. Perhaps rightly so, they will remain one of the greatest enigmas of our time. The Tower of London is the oldest palace and fortress in Europe. Behind this facade of respectability lie dark, blood-curdling tales of terror, sinister acts born of ruthless ambition. For over 900 years, these monumental walls have overshadowed the city of London. Even today, the Tower of London is one of the capital's most prominent landmarks. Standing on the banks of the River Thames, this great royal fortress is one of the most popular attractions in Britain, with 2 million visitors every year.
Well, I've been working at the Tower of London as an assistant curator and archaeologist for 6 years, and the place never ceases to amaze me how much there is to discover here. And one thing that I still can't get my head around is the fact that we have buildings here from every century, from the 11th century to the 21st century. I can't really think of anywhere else in England or Europe or anywhere else in the world that can say that. It's just immensely exciting.
The White Tower is the center of today's castle. In the 12th century, the monarchy, inspired by the design of European castles, built the first perimeter walls. At the end of the 13th century, Edward I, one of the greatest castle builders of all time, constructed a second concentric wall and dug a new moat, giving us the shape of the castle we see today.
One of the most long-lasting functions of the Tower of London, and the one that's impressed itself most on people's memories, is its function as a prison.
For prisoners jailed in the tower, this would have been a dreadful place.
They are kept probably in solitary confinement, and food will be brought to them by their jailer. They won't be able to talk to anyone. Sometimes imprisonment must have been a very, very unpleasant business indeed.
Many of the tormented prisoners left behind engravings on the walls of their cells that can still be seen today. The intricacy of these gruesome carvings reveals the depths of their suffering. Their misery was sometimes made much worse by merciless torturers. These cruel acts were often the result of the ambitious desires of the monarchy.
It's very, very important to be aware that torture in this instance was done only by royal warrant, and the interrogators did do it out of sadism. They did it because they needed to get information.
The Tower of London was founded by the first Norman king of England, William the Conqueror, soon after he invaded England in 1066.
We know from writers at the time that he thought that the people of London were a huge, fierce and fickle population, and for that reason he felt that he needed to protect himself within the city, and so he built the Tower of London.
Next up, gruesome tales of treason and treachery at the Tower. As the Tower of London grew in size, a variety of intimidating defenses were added to resist attack.
The reason why this one particular arch was so securely defended is because all those hundreds and hundreds of years ago, this was the only entry into the inner wards, into the royal palace itself.
Since the 14th century, the castle has been protected by yeoman warders. Today, there are 38 of them, all former non-commissioned officers from the armed forces, and they live with their families within the tower walls.
Most people call us beef eaters. That's a nickname. No one's really sure where it came from. The nearest we can get to it is that certainly during the reign of Henry VIII, we were partly paid in beef.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now stand beside one of the most famous or infamous gates, for that matter, in the history of the world. For before you lies Traitor's Gate. And for all you lovely Americans, do you know what it was originally called? Watergate.
We are the Tower Guardians. We are more or less a policeman. We're responsible for everything within the tower, the safety, the security of everything, and the people that visit. But our main job is the security of this great royal palace.
As well as being watched over by yeoman warders, the tower is also secured by military guards from the same regiment as those at Buckingham Palace. Their most important duty is to guard the crown jewels that are kept secure in the Waterloo Barracks. And there are other residents of the tower that have an historic role to play in defending the castle: the Ravens. Yeoman warder Derrick Coyle is the Raven Master.
On that little bit of a wall there, you can see two of our ravens. The one nearest us is called Moonin. The one just behind her is called Cedric. It's my job to look after these birds. Now, whilst we're on about them, they are not tame, they are semi-wild. You go into their territory, they'll attack. Put your finger out, they're allowed to take the finger end straight off. Look at the beaks on them. As well as that, their talons are razor sharp. So please give these birds the respect that they deserve.
Right, come on, Hardy, good boy. Come on, good
Ravens have lived here for hundreds of years, and tradition holds that if they should ever leave, the White Tower will be destroyed and a great disaster will befall England.
Come on, Thor, good boy.
In 1660, Charles II took this belief so seriously that he decreed that at least 6 ravens should be kept here at all times. Today, these birds have their wing feathers clipped so they can't fly away. These famous residents of the tower get 5-star treatment.
And that's what they get, look. Prime heart. Ravens are magnificent birds. They're very humorous, they're very mischievous, and they're very, very intelligent. Oh, I love them. Come on then. come on then.
The Tower of London was originally built as a royal palace, and it was used as a royal residence until Elizabethan times. Many kings and queens of England were treated to a lavish lifestyle here. But some of the aristocracy were brought to the tower for a much more sinister purpose: to be locked up.
It's very important to know that this isn't just any old prison. This is a very important prison of state, and most of the people who are brought here are people who are either too important or too dangerous to be kept anywhere else.
Prisoners at the tower were expected to pay for their own keep. Wealthy royalty and noblemen could afford to live comfortably, bringing in their own possessions and buying themselves extravagant meals.
Most of your prisoners would be living in houses or would be living in towers. It's not like Alcatraz, it's an awful lot more like living under house arrest, and that's what it would be like.
Sir Walter Raleigh, famous explorer of the Americas, was imprisoned in the Bloody Tower for 13 years after his alleged involvement in a plot against King James I. He lived here with his wife and 2 sons, wrote the history of the world, and even grew tobacco in the Tower Garden. And then he was finally executed in 1618. The most notorious prisoners were brought to the tower by river, often at night, where they entered the fortress through the now infamous Traitor's Gate.
Many an alleged traitor were to come through these gates here, including 4 queens of England: Queen Anne Boleyn, Queen Catherine Howard, Lady Jane Grey, the uncrowned Queen of 9 days only, and of course the young Princess Elizabeth, who later became Queen Elizabeth I.
For prisoners such as Anne Boleyn, this journey would be their last. Anne Boleyn was the second wife of Henry VIII, and after her conviction for adultery, she was brought to the tower. Ironically, her lodgings were the same rooms she had stayed in just 3 years earlier to prepare for her coronation. Anne was condemned to execution by beheading. At her request, a swordsman from France was summoned to deliver a swift death with a sharp sword, rather than the traditional axe, which could take several blows. On the morning of the 19th of May, 1536, she was finally given the dignity of a private execution on Tower Green. Only 7 prisoners, the most prestigious, were beheaded within the tower walls. All other unfortunates were executed outside the perimeter walls in full view of the public. Up until the 19th century, no one knew what happened to the bodies. But in 1876, workmen restoring the tower's chapel made a gruesome discovery. 1,500 corpses were lying under the flagstones.
They are still there now in the area of the altar, with a new Victorian pavement laid over the top of them, bearing their names and the coats of arms of the important people buried in that area: Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Lady Jane Grey, the Earl of Essex, and many others.
Some of the royal victims still haunt the castle today. The tale of the 2 little princes is one of the saddest stories of the tower. After their father, Edward IV, died in 1483, the boys were lodged in the tower while the eldest was prepared for coronation. But their uncle Richard declared the boys illegitimate and had himself crowned as King Richard III. The princes were soon to mysteriously disappear. The common belief is that they were murdered, and many suspected that the dreadful crime was sanctioned by King Richard. Reports at the time stated that the youngest boy was smothered to death, and his older brother fatally stabbed. full truth will never be known.
There's an aftermath to this story that in the year 1674, some workmen doing some work near the White Tower, quite by accident, came upon the burials of two small children. The authorities at the time convinced King Charles II, then on the throne, that these were none other than the bones of the two missing princes in the tower. And they were taken to Westminster Abbey, where even now they're buried, interred within a marble urn in a place called Innocents' Corner.
Every stone, every brick in the wall has its own little story to tell. And when you think that I walk around every day where kings and queens of England have walked, some for their last walk, it just brings it home to you. It's a great traditional place, and long may it stay that way as well.
Coming up, we relive the glories of ancient Rome in the greatest amphitheater ever built. Colosseum, a marvel of Roman engineering and the greatest amphitheater ever built. This huge stadium was designed so that as many Romans as possible could watch the most cruel and violent games the world has ever seen. Thousands died here in the name of popular entertainment. The Colosseum stands in the heart of Rome, the vibrant capital city of Italy. Rome and its architecture is a must-see on the grand tour of Europe. It's a living museum overflowing with ancient wonders. Throughout the city are relics of over 2,000 years of history, dating back to before the time of Christ. The most awe-inspiring of all these ancient monuments is the Inaugurated in 80 AD, this sporting arena was the brainchild of the Emperor Flavius Vespasian and was originally called the Flavian Amphitheatre. The building is divided into 4 levels. The first 3 have arches, and the 4th divided into compartments with windows.
I've seen pictures and everything, but they really can't capture how big it really is.
The fact that an ancient people were able to construct something so incredibly huge is just incredible to me.
The idea of it, the immensity of it, the enormity of it, the engineering of it, just absolutely fascinating.
What we see today is nothing compared to what the spectacular amphitheater would have looked like in ancient Rome. In its prime, the Colosseum was faced with marble, and each portico was filled with an ornate statue of an important Roman figure. At the very top of the building, there were 240 masts, which supported an enormous canvas awning, known as the velarium. On sunny days, it was stretched over the top to provide shade for the spectators. The amphitheater had a capacity of over 50,000 people. Archaeologists, like Lynn Lancaster, have worked out how the Colosseum was designed to cope with such large numbers of spectators. They would have entered through one of 80 different entrances.
Above each of the arches on the ground level, there's actually a Roman numeral, and they go from 1 to 76. Through these numbers, you would know where to go into the building, and then, so if you were sitting over there, you wouldn't want to come in over here and then wander all around. You would want to come in on one of the gates there. And this was one of the really clever things about the building, is that they were able to organize very large groups of people to get to the right very quickly.
Despite the size of the building, more than 50,000 people would have been able to reach their seats within a matter of minutes. Where the people sat was determined by social class. The highest class senators would sit nearest the arena, and wealthy men would sit in the second tier. Above that, poorer men would sit in the third tier. Women and slaves were restricted to the very top, where there were only uncomfortable wooden benches. There were also two boxes, no longer preserved, one for the emperor and one for the sacred priestesses, the Vestal Virgins.
Now these would be the only women who would be sitting low down, and these were prime seats. So the Vestal Virgins gave up a lot to be Vestal Virgins, but they got something in return.
Each day's bloodshed was divided into 3 parts. Professor Roger Wilson from the University of Nottingham has researched the day's events.
First of all, in the morning, you had the animal shows. This was, if you like, the hors d'oeuvre. This was the warming up of the people. And then at midday, if there were criminals to be executed, then they would be executed. And then after a pause, there would be the afternoon entertainment, and that was what people were really waiting for, the gladiatorial combat. I think you've got to imagine a good deal of noise, the roar of the spectators. We're talking about 50,000 people packed into that arena, making one hell of a din.
To provide this dramatic entertainment, there was a large working area underneath the arena. Hidden elevators and trapdoors with a complicated system of counterweights and pulleys allowed animals, men, and scenery to appear from underground.
The cage would pop up through the floor, and so this is one of the ways they could, to make it more spectacular, they could have scenery or gladiators or animals sort of coming up from nowhere.
Up next, the most sensational and bloodthirsty games ever. The most sensational games at the Colosseum in Rome were in 107 AD. 10,000 gladiators fought to the death in a bloodbath that lasted 123 days.
An enormous amount of entertainment, and also there were no less than 11,000 animals butchered in the course of that 123 days. At the end of the games, when they'd all been slaughtered, one of the fascinating questions is, what happened to their carcasses? When you've got an elephant dead in the arena, okay, you can drag it out, but what then do you do with it? Whether they were cut up and given to feed other animals that were waiting their turn, we simply don't know.
The dead animals and corpses would probably have been taken to one of the many buildings surrounding the Colosseum. In 1937, the remains of the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiatorial school in Rome, were discovered next door to the Colosseum. A mini arena has been partly excavated, and this is where the gladiators were subjected to a strict program of training, watched over by their trainers who would have sat on the surrounding seats. The gladiators would have lived here in a permanent state of captivity.
Gladiators were either slaves or they were criminals. In either case, they were expendable. It was a very hard life. They lived in pretty harsh conditions. I'm sure they were pretty abysmally treated. But if the alternative was either straight execution or condemnation to the mine, then frankly, perhaps it was a better life being a gladiator. At least you had hope.
They walked to the games through an underground tunnel that led directly from the Ludus Magnus to beneath the Colosseum. The ultimate prize was a gladiator's freedom, but this was rarely granted.
The pinnacle of gladiators' achievement, if they'd really been successful, was that they would go on winning, they'd go on getting adulation in the amphitheatre, and as we know from inscriptions, they were the equivalent of the pop stars of the day.
The Colosseum is so well preserved that it's not difficult to imagine the gory events of 2,000 years ago.
Once you stood down on the floor and looked up at where Caesar sat, you can imagine what it's like to be a gladiator and be fighting for your life in there. It's quite amazing.
It seated 50,000 people, but pretty much for the wrong reasons.
So excited, people being killed, people being mauled, but drama and theatre and excitement and everything was here, all life was here.
Construction of the Colosseum began in 70 AD, and this masterpiece of engineering took 10 years to build. Around 300,000 cartloads of huge stone blocks were used to build the outer walls. Towards the top of the monument, the stone was replaced by much smaller and lighter bricks, held together with mortar.
Roman mortar is particularly strong, much stronger than, say, the mortar they would use in Greece, because there's a volcanic material in the area called pozzolana. You can actually see the pozzolana in there. It's the little dark speckles. But it has chemicals in it that will bind with the lime, and it'll create a mortar that's 8 to 10 times stronger than the regular mortar.
Since its heyday, the Colosseum has suffered from plundering and decay. The outer wall was partially destroyed when it was damaged by an earthquake in the 14th century. But some of the damage was much more deliberate.
Yes, people often ask me why the Colosseum looks like a bunch of Swiss cheese, because it has all these holes in it. And these holes are robber holes. The whole monument was put together, at least the stone parts, were put together with iron clamps and iron dowels. And in the medieval period, when they needed to have lots of iron to melt down for cannonballs or whatever, they would go to ancient monuments and they would dig out the ancient iron and then melt it down into whatever they needed.
It's a marvel that this huge building is still standing without any of the original iron clamps and dowels.
Once they put the arches all the way around, then it forms sort of a unified whole, and so it's not nearly as unstable. And so even when you take the pins out, it's not going to fall down because it's structurally sound.
The more archaeologists learn about this grand monument, the more respect they have for the skills of the ancient Roman craftsmen.
This building is overwhelming at times. Every time I come here, I see something new. It's really exciting to be here.
For over 300 years, this was Rome's premier killing ground. But towards the end of the Roman Empire and the onset of Christianity, the Romans began to grow unhappy with the savage roll call of brutality. In 404 AD, the Emperor Honorius finally banned gladiator shows forever. Today, this triumph of Roman architecture is surely one of the most monumental ancient wonders of the world. Next up, we investigate the mysteries of the oldest structure on Earth. Deep in the heart of the English countryside lies what is possibly the oldest structure on Earth. This is Stonehenge. It was built by prehistoric man, and yet, amazingly, this extraordinary monument is aligned with the cosmos. The arrangement of the stones can predict exactly when the sun and the moon will eclipse. And on the longest day of the year, they line up precisely with the midsummer sunrise. Stonehenge stands on the bleak expanse of Salisbury Plain. On the eve of the longest day of the year, thousands of people gather together at Stonehenge to party through the night and celebrate the dawn of the summer solstice. For Celtic priests known as druids, this is the time of year when the lure of these ancient stones seems to reach its greatest power.
Druids have always been at Stonehenge and celebrating the birth of the longest day, which is a major part of our religious experience. And what we as Druids believe is that at the summer solstice, Druids, pagans, Christians, Hindus, Jews, it doesn't matter, have a focal point in the British landscape where they can gather to celebrate what is the longest day of the year.
It is believed that this ancient stone circle has long been a spiritual focus.
We're going back to a time in ancient Britain when the pagan faith was predominant and they celebrated the changing of the seasons and they went to specific places and sacred sites to celebrate that. So Stonehenge has always been a gathering point at the summer solstice.
Stonehenge is the most complete megalithic monument in Europe. Older than the Great Pyramid in Egypt, the site dates back 5,000 years. That's 2,500 years earlier than even the first Druids, and there is nothing else like it anywhere in the world. The magnetism of these stones draws more than 1 million visitors every year to ponder the questions: who built this ancient monument? How was it built? And why?
Stonehenge is one of the great wonders of the world, so we're here in the mist and the rain to see it.
My first impression was on the road coming up here, and you just see them in the distance, and I was really excited over it, you know.
It's pretty incredible, yeah.
It is, it's awesome.
Fabulous. To think that it's British, and it's been there so long. I mean, you know, how did they do it?
The intriguing enigma of Stonehenge has left a lasting impression on many generations of visitors.
It is unique. Stonehenge is recognised around the world. I mean, you draw the trilithon symbol out and people recognise that. In the same way as you draw the pyramid out, they recognise those things. It is an internationally known monument. It's become that sort of icon. The mystery is, what was it used for? Why was it built? There is no written evidence, so we'll never actually know the motives behind it. And I suppose the fun about Stonehenge, because we don't know, you can speculate.
There are plenty of theories. Some believe that this site was designed for sacrifice. In the Middle Ages, people thought the monstrous stones had been put up by giants, and since then, there have even been theories that this is a UFO landing site.
Rising to the open sky.
Druid priests are firm in their belief that Stonehenge was built as a temple.
How Stonehenge got there and how it was built is lost in the mystery of time. But I firmly believe I know what it's there for, and that is as a place of worship at the turning of the seasons of the year.
What we do know is that it was built with astounding precision, and the alignment of the stones will accurately predict the turn of the seasons. In the outer ring of stones, one of them is half the width of the others, creating 29.5 stones. These may well represent the 29.5 days in a lunar month. 4 stationed stones set outside the stone circle mark the most northerly and southerly positions of the risings and settings of the sun and the moon. Around the outside of the stones, there are 56 pits known as Aubrey holes. Using a model of Stonehenge, Robin Heath can demonstrate how these pits could have predicted a lunar eclipse.
If we imagine that the Earth is the centre of Stonehenge, the temple represents the Earth, then we can say that the outer ditch and bank represents the sky.
By moving a marker for the moon by 2 Aubrey holes each day, and a marker for the sun once every 13 days, the model behaves like an astronomical calculator. When the 2 markers coincide, the Aubrey holes predict an eclipse. When we return, we get fired up with the druid priests. 4,500 years ago, prehistoric man began the extraordinary feat of positioning the stones at Stonehenge. At first, there were just the smaller blue stones, named after the bluish color of the rock. These were erected inside a pre-existing earthwork in the shape of a double crescent. Two or 300 years later, the much larger stones, the Sarsen stones, were brought from the Marlborough Downs, 20 miles away. These huge boulders were arranged in a closed circle with 5 immense trilithons in a horseshoe shape in the center. Mysteriously, the smaller blue stones were then completely repositioned within the circle. Hauling the Sarsen stones to the site would have required heroic effort. They weighed anything up to a massive 50 tons. In 1996, a large group of volunteers conducted an experiment to find out how it could have been done. They were limited to the tools of the prehistoric age: ropes, wooden levers, and brute force. They successfully hauled the replica Sarsen stone along a sledge guided by wooden tracks. Then there was the problem of how the ancient craftsmen could have stood the stone upright. The team exploited some basic principles of weights and balance. More brute force was needed to stand it straight. But the original builder still had the daunting task of raising the lintel stones. The outer circle of Sarsen stones once supported a complete ring of 30 lintels, 15 feet above the ground. This was one of the greatest engineering achievements of prehistory. One solution is that the lintels were raised by progressively adding to a temporary timber platform. Then the craftsmen had to line up holes carved out of each end of the lintel with a protruding tenon on top of each upright stone.
I think that was a precarious operation. You had to slide the lintel from the cradle onto 2 upright stones with tenon joints in them and get it right. And they did get it right.
An hour before dawn, the solstice festivities reach a climax. The druids lead the torchlit procession in a complete circle around the stones, symbolizing the earth orbiting the sun.
These stones have been used as a gathering point for many, many millennia. And it's in that they have gathered their own power and their own mystique, and it's that draws successive generations to them.
Over 200 generations have passed since Stonehenge was erected. Yet this great wonder is still here, for us to admire and marvel at its construction. Built across mountain ranges up to 8,000 feet high, the Great Wall of China is a feat of engineering unparalleled in the world. It extends over 4,500 miles from North Korea to the wastes of the Gobi Desert. The same distance as from Miami to the North Pole. The Great Wall of China is the longest man-made structure on the planet. In 250 BC, China was a nation of warring states. After decades of fighting, the emperor Qin Shi Huangdi succeeded in joining the different kingdoms into a single unified China. But the victorious emperor needed to protect his new country from marauding tribes from the north. In 221 BC, he ordered the building of the Great Wall of China. So good was the quality of construction that many sections are still standing 2,000 years later. It has been calculated that the wall would have cost $260 billion in today's money. In 1999, a group of British tourists set off on a 100-mile hike along the wall to raise money for charity. This was to be the adventure holiday of a lifetime.
I really thought it would be a straightforward walk in the park kind of thing. Trust me, it wasn't.
Okay, ready, skate!
Their plan was to walk along the most treacherous parts of the wall. Just getting up to the wall itself involved a tough 2-hour hike through rough terrain, and the only way was up.
As we approached the wall, it looked about 1 million feet high, and I thought to myself, and they want me to get up there? Nah, I'm going back home.
No one could get on it by themselves. I mean, it was much higher than I was, probably about 6-7 foot high in some places where we wanted to get on. So we had to have 2 people on the top of the wall, 2 people below, and they sort of pushed you up and had to get you on top.
Reaching the top was a momentous achievement for Abe, who suffers from vertigo.
Actually got up on the wall, and I said, I made it. I made it. And that was just ecstatic, simply just being there.
Just really takes your breath away. It's so exhausting, but such an achievement when you actually get up there.
Don't look down.
The hikers have been given permission to walk sections of the Great Wall normally off limits, and in parts, it was crumbling and dangerously precarious.
The parts of it that were crumbling that we walked on, that was the best bit, because you're out there on your own, and parts of it were a bit scary. Luckily, I don't suffer from vertigo or anything, but it was still scary even for me.
At one stage, I was walking up, and someone said to me, right, Abe, now look behind you. And I felt as if I was on the moon looking down. I didn't realise I'd gone that far up.
How you doing, mate?
All right. Chinese people are generally much shorter than all of us, and to think that they actually built the wall and climbed along it was just amazing. So it really made you think about who was building it and how they'd actually managed to lug all of these big blocks of stone and actually build the wall.
When the Great Wall was initially built during the Qin dynasty, It was made of compacted earth and reeds. Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi used 300,000 soldiers and 500,000 conscripts. He built the 3,000 miles of the wall in just 10 years. One of the world's leading experts on Chinese history is Carol Michelson.
Qin Shi Huangdi has been both revered and reviled throughout Chinese history. But generally, his building of the Great Wall was regarded by most people as one of the most abhorrent things that he did, because an awful lot of people died building it. Many people were sent many hundreds of miles away from their home and never made it back again. There are millions of bones buried under the foundations of the Great Wall to help strengthen it.
In the 16th century, in response to the threat of invading Mongols from the north, the Great Wall of China was substantially renovated and extended.
It was during the Ming Dynasty that the wall that we see in China today was reconstructed and rebuilt, made of brick and stone, special kilns being set up to bake the bricks in each place in order to make it sturdier than it had been. It is the brick and stone reconstruction that the astronauts could see from the moon and that the actual tourists who go to China today see. And this is a very much sturdier, more impressive wall than the original Great Wall would ever have been.
Up next, the Chinese army defends the wall against marauding invaders from the north. Today, the Great Wall of China is an accessible tourist destination and attracts people from all over the world. Most tourists visit the reconstructed sections close to Beijing. In 1972, Richard Nixon was the first American president to visit China. A stop at the wall provided the perfect photo opportunity.
We've come a long way, but I would say it's worth coming 16,000 miles just to stand here and see the wall.
In 1998, Bill Clinton was equally impressed.
Even more magnificent than I had imagined it would be. And there are much more sudden changes in altitude than I thought.
The sheer size of the Great Wall ensured that it was rarely breached. But during the early years, it was constantly attacked by enemies from the north. Soldiers sent coded smoke signals along the wall to warn of potential attack. When the wall was rebuilt in the Ming Dynasty, watchtowers were constructed every 200 yards, and extensions of the wall were built at right angles, so the soldiers could attack the enemy from two sides. If the wall was breached, the Chinese troops could retreat and take cover behind specially designed buttresses. If all else failed, they could take refuge in the heavily fortified watchtowers. But it was the Chinese invention of gunpowder that was eventually used by the enemy to effectively attack the wall.
Once they could use cannons, they could breach the Great Wall very easily. And by the end of the Ming Dynasty, it was perfectly obvious that building this wall was fairly useless if in fact it could be breached by cannons. And so at the end of the Ming Dynasty in 1644, the reconstruction of the Great Wall basically ended.
After 6 days, the charity walkers completed their 100-mile hike.
We are the conquerors.
Reaching the end of such a unique adventure was an emotional experience.
It's very, very emotional. We all hugged each other. You know, we've made it, blisters and all.
Anyone who visits the Great Wall of China cannot fail to be impressed by the vastness of this ancient wonder.
It's just such an amazing feat. The fact that they were able in 200 BC to build such an immense project is testimony to the greatness of Chinese civilization.
This is one of the most isolated places on Earth. Yet every year, 20,000 tourists make the journey here to see some of the strangest wonders of the world. Easter Island is over 2,000 miles from the nearest habitation in Chile. It's a place with a tragic history where the events of the past almost destroyed an entire population. 887 gigantic statues dot the island. Some perch on top of beautifully crafted platforms called ahu, and the statues face inland towards the island community. These mysterious figures all have similar features: an elongated head, long ears, a prominent nose, and determinedly pursed lips. Some are crowned with enormous cylinders of red stones, and they all have an eerily human-like stance.
If you look at the statues, you can see portraying in their image the presence of an elder person. It's not a friendly person that kind of look into your eyes and smiling, but somebody either mean or authoritarian and too arrogant to look close to you. So it's an attitude of authority, in a sense, of the Polynesian style.
Easter Island, known as Rapa Nui by the locals, has an area of just 60 square miles, about the size of Boston. The original inhabitants were Polynesians who sailed from distant islands sometime before 800 AD. Soon after their arrival, the islanders began to build these extraordinary statues. Their original purpose has been lost in time, but the Rapa Nui population today believe they were built as a representation of their Polynesian ancestors.
In many of the Polynesian islands, the representation of the ancestor were done with small figurines, sometimes within piles of rocks. At Rapa Nui, we have the image of the ancestor, and it grew in size and style from a small round head figure all the way to the largest of 22 meter high.
Most of the platforms with statues are sited along the coast, but there are many more statues inland. The world's leading expert on the island's statues is Joanne Van Tilburg, an American archaeologist. She's been surveying and documenting the stones for the last 20 years.
Easter Island has probably been the most important project I have ever worked on. I didn't come here intending to work as an archaeologist, but once here, I think, well, I fell in love. Yeah, we have to check a couple of these. 163 to be exact. 163 to the bottom of the neck.
By taking hundreds of careful measurements of each statue, Van Tilburg has built up an intimate knowledge of their individual features.
And on the side of the neck? Even though the statues at first glance appear all the same and appear standardized, they have individual design characteristics, and they have in fact individual personalities. So that now I can see what the Rapa Nui people have always said, which is that these are the faces of their ancestors.
Most of the statues were carved from compressed volcanic ash concentrated in this extinct crater known as Rano Raraku. There are 397 statues stranded in various stages of completion in this quarry.
I think the quarry for everybody who comes here is sort of the beating heart of the island. It's the place where the energy is concentrated in terms of the numbers of statues and the size of statues.
This rock was never used to build houses or even walls. The mountain was a revered site that provided the Rapa Nui with the precious material to build statues.
It was a place of tremendous energy and production, but it was also a sacred place, a place that was scary, that was filled with spirits. Come around at night, they seem a little, they're a little spooky.
The original Rapa Nui Islanders lived in complete isolation from the rest of the world until Easter Sunday 1722, when a Dutch navigator, Jacob Roeivane, landed on the shores and named the place Easter Island. These explorers marveled at the statues, but if they did discover anything of their purpose, nothing was recorded for posterity. After the break, we reveal the disaster that struck Easter Island. As recently as 25 years ago, archaeologists made an intriguing new discovery about the Easter Island statues. Some of the figures would originally have had eyes made of coral.
We have learned for the first time that the stone carving on Easter Islands have carried inlaid eyes once they're placed on the platforms. And that is true throughout the entire islands. Although fragments of coral has been found before by colleagues, and even almost a whole eyes, we did not discover that these are eyes of statues until 1978.
The most enduring mystery that has yet to be solved is how these huge statues were transported to their specially prepared platforms. It's believed that some of the smaller ones might have been rolled on logs, but this would have been impossible for the largest statues that can weigh anything up to 82 tons.
Once you get up into these large-size statues, there's a whole other series of problems that come up proportionate to their size increase. And there has been speculation on the part of some that perhaps they were in fact manipulated upright over this terrain and out along the roads. It hasn't been demonstrated yet that that could have been done here, but it's open to consideration.
For hundreds of years, Easter Island supported a thriving community, and the population increased to around 10,000. The islanders built bigger and bigger statues. But then, in the 17th century, something went terribly wrong. The landscape is strewn with toppled, abandoned statues, and many of them seem to have been deliberately decapitated. Why would the islanders suddenly turn against their sacred statues? Pollen analysis of samples taken from the bottom of this lake revealed that the island was once heavily forested with giant palm trees. Over the years, the islanders cut them down to provide housing, wood for fires, and logs for transporting the statues. They created an ecological disaster. As the forests disappeared, the land began to erode, and their crops began to fail.
When that came, then the obvious consequence, among others, was social conflict. And social conflict led to intertribal fightings and eventually to a total social organization change. So within this social conflict, the monuments were either abandoned or destroyed.
This was the end of the era of the statues. The survivors of the conflict had to find new ways of living on this desolate island. They couldn't escape because there was no wood to build boats. And there was worse to come when passing ships began to dock at Easter Island. Repeated raids by slave traders and the introduction of unfamiliar infectious diseases almost wiped out the population.
We do know for a fact that in 1877, our population on this island was only 111, almost 2 exterminations. We could have lost the entire human group. That would be perhaps the saddest aspect of human history.
Now annexed by Chile, the island has rebounded from near obscurity with its current population of more than 3,000. We still don't understand the original purpose of these statues, but today they provide an important source of income for the Rapa Nui. Tourists and archaeologists flock to the island to wonder at these extraordinary legacies of the past. In the 18th century, a Spanish priest was sent by his bishop to explore the dense jungle of Central America. Searching for new land to cultivate, he stumbled upon some hauntingly beautiful ruins rising spectacularly out of the forest. This was the lost city of Palenque. Palenque lies on the edge of the jungle in Chiapas, Mexico. Vast, mysterious, and enchanting, this ruined city was originally constructed by a long-lost Native American civilization, the Maya. "250 years after it was first discovered, archaeologists are still unraveling the mystery of what happened to the Maya and why these ancient people abandoned their city. The ruins date back to before the 7th century, when the Maya civilization covered large areas of Central America. Chichen Itza, at the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, is one of the most famous of the excavated cities. But Palenque, nearly 300 miles to the southwest, is even more impressive and intriguing. Many of the buildings on this sprawling site have still to be reclaimed from the jungle. Julia Miller is one of an international team of archaeologists who's been unearthing the secrets of this ancient city.
Palenque is almost a magical place. It has a certain appeal that other sites don't. It's special. Between the buildings and the woods that surround the buildings, it's just a wonderful place to come and spend time and visit.
More than 1,000 tourists every day flock to this lost city to admire the elaborate creations of the Maya. Tour guide Moises Morales shows many of them around the site.
Palenque doesn't have beaches, Palenque doesn't have good hotels, Palenque doesn't have nice discos. Palenque has nothing but the ruins and the beautiful nature. So the people that comes to Palenque, they come for a cultural reason. So you see the best people of the world visiting Palenque, and that's a real privilege.
Originally, this city would have supported a population of 15 to 20,000 people. Their wooden houses are long gone, but the palaces and temples built from limestone have survived the passage of time. The most spectacular building at Palenque is the Royal Palace. It was built over several generations as successive ruling kings added their embellishments.
This is a paradise in the sense that the monuments are among the most important ones in the world. So the Maya culture is one of the 10 very important cultures. So what else do you want?
The Maya culture was very complex. They had their own form of writing, the Central American equivalent of Egyptian hieroglyphics, which has still not been fully deciphered even today. And they had an obsession with blood. Ritual bloodletting was a major part of any important event. Human sacrifice was often the climax of religious celebrations and sporting events. Coming up, we descend to a subterranean world of the dead. Over the last 50 years, there have been a series of dramatic discoveries in the ancient Maya city of Palenque in Mexico. One of the most impressive was at the Temple of Inscriptions, an 85-foot-high, 8-stepped pyramid. In 1952, a Mexican archaeologist, Alberto Ruiz Lulia, set about reclaiming this stone monument from the jungle undergrowth. At the base of the pyramid, he discovered an entrance to a dank and eerie staircase blocked by tons of debris. After 3 seasons of intense excavation, he uncovered steps that led 80 feet down into the heart of the pyramid. At the very bottom was a vaulted burial chamber containing an intricately carved stone sarcophagus. Inside was the skeleton of Pakal Votan, one of the great ruling kings of the city. His face was covered by a mosaic jade death mask. The carvings on the massive sarcophagus depict Pakal at the moment of his death, falling into the underworld, symbolized by a monster's jaws.
The man that is buried here was the most important person in the half of the world during his life. When this man was alive, the 7th century, there was nothing in Europe and there was nothing in the Pacific. There was nothing in the American continent but the Maya. So in the Western world, there is nothing more important in the 7th and 8th century than the Maya culture.
This was the very first pyramid tomb ever discovered in the Americas, and is still the most important and impressive. Here at Palenque, there are more than 1,000 buildings still to be reclaimed from the jungle. But by the laws of Mexico, you're not allowed to excavate a building unless you intend to restore it. For Mexican archaeologist Alfonso Morales, it's a time-consuming process.
The restoration is very slow, it's very tedious, it's very expensive. We can tell that 50 structures had been uncovered in 200 years. If we multiply by the known number of structures, it will take us 3,600 years to do the site of Palenque.
One of the latest projects involves restoring a pyramid that's become overgrown by trees. The Maya had ingeniously covered a natural hill with limestone blocks and built a temple on top. When Julia Miller and her team surveyed the site with ground-penetrating radar, it revealed a tomb hidden 15 feet beneath the temple. To investigate further, they dug an exploratory pit.
It looks about the same as before.
A little bit of cleaning, maybe, a little bit dusting. Could be.
At the bottom of the pit, they located the corner of the tomb, and the archaeologists were able to insert a video camera by digging out a small hole.
It's looking towards the northwest corner right now. It's at the roof. Okay, I can see the doors at the southern end of the tomb. I think, yeah, that's a little bit better. And if you can turn it, there we go. Okay, I can see 4 pots. I can see some jade beads that are on the floor. There's a lot of debris that's fallen onto the floor. It looks like the debris is from the walls. It was really exciting because most tombs have something of pottery. They'll have jade, they'll have shell, they'll have lots of different kinds of artifacts. But this tomb is really special because it has mural paintings on the walls. Yeah, now you can see one of the figures on the west side of the tomb. It's a man. He's wearing an elaborate headdress with lots of feathers on it, and he's got a necklace, probably of jade beads, and he's wearing like a kilt.
The Maya didn't mummify their dead, so the body in the tomb has long since decomposed.
We don't know whose tomb it was. At this point, we can't see any hieroglyphic writing on the walls or on any of the ceramic vessels. What I think I can still see is But the shape of the ceramic pots tells us that the tomb came from about 540 AD.
Mysteriously, sometime during the 8th century, the Maya civilization at Palenque collapsed. Nobody really knows why. Ecological disaster, war, and famine are possible causes. But whatever the reason, these majestic monuments were deserted and left to decay under a shroud of tangled vines and foliage. Over 1,000 years later, Palenque has a mystical charm that will enchant tourists and archaeologists forever.
When Palenque empties out at the end of the day and the sun is setting in the west, it's just a beautiful, beautiful place. The monkeys start howling, the birds start singing, and you just want to sit and soak in the atmosphere.
Around the globe, there is a rich heritage of magnificent monuments left behind by our ancient ancestors. These amazing feats of engineering have survived the ravages of time and outlasted entire civilizations. They stand as a testimony to the triumph of human endeavor.